TuneIn.com, Hing.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
School is in, but are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Awakening Educator. My name is Megan Sweet. My lovely co-host, Susan Andrian, isn't with us today. She had some work commitments, so I get to have our guest all to myself, and I could not be more happy. Today, we'll be speaking with Meena Srinivasan, who is an educational leader, innovator with deep experience in both social emotional learning and mindful awareness practices. She's an author of Teach, Breathe, Learn, Mindfulness in and Out of the Classroom, and SEL Every Day, Integrating Social Emotional Learning with Instruction in Secondary Classrooms, which also was just chosen to be one of the Greater Good Science Center's magazine's 2019 Books of the Year for Educators. Meena is the Executive Director of Transformative Educational Leadership. And prior to that role, she spent 5.5 years working in partnership with the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, also known as CASEL, to implement social emotional learning system-wide in Oakland Unified School District. She's a national board certified teacher and holds an administrative credential and with the state of California. Meena is also a contributor to United Nations publications on inclusive education, and she earned a master's degree in education from UC Berkeley and a bachelor's degree in history and political science from Amherst College. Her international outlook was enhanced by spending her junior year abroad studying at the London School of Economics. Meena is a student of the late Ramchandra Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, and Nobel Peace Prize nominee Thich Nhat Hanh. She was involved in the creation of Thich Nhat Hanh's best-selling books, Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children, and Happy Teachers Change the World, a guide for cultivating mindfulness in education. Meena served on the board of directors of the Mindfulness in Education Network and advisory board of the San Francisco Asian Art Museum's exhibit, Yoga, the Art of Transformation. She's also a recipient of the Hamera Foundation Contemplative Education Fellowship. Extremely impressive bio there for Meena. And Meena is also a dear friend of mine and somebody who I think is a true leader in the educational world. We'll be talking with Meena today about, this is part 3 in our Mindfulness in Education series. And today we'll be talking with Meena about administrators and leaders and their role with mindfulness in education. So we've talked already with somebody who brought mindfulness in more at the school level and talked about how that impacted them. Then we spoke with somebody who talked about mindfulness and improv. That was our last show with our guest Megan Sweet, which was me. And now we have Meena, who will be talking with us about the work that she's done, both as a teacher and an administrator in bringing mindfulness to educational context. So I couldn't be happier to have you on board, Meena. So welcome. And yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself beyond that very impressive resume.
Well, I just want to start off by thanking you, Megan, and the opportunity. Our paths crossed in Oakland for about a year when we were on the same team. And it's just an honor to be connected with you. And Susan, I'm so glad that you're doing this show. And I actually wanted to speak to the title Awakening a little bit before I talk about myself. And it's something that actually my husband and I have been talking about a lot lately. And, you know, there's this term woke, right? Woke, particularly in our context in Oakland. But, you know, this term woke that has become very popular in the past few years. And what I've been realizing is the importance of the term awakening and the sense of like we never arrive to a place, right, of being woke. It is a journey, it is a process. And when we're truly practicing mindfulness, it's a constant uncovering and deepening of our understanding of ourselves and others in the world. And so I'm going to just invite us all to think about awakening versus being woke. Because I think what comes with that too is a quality of humility and humbleness, and none of us has the answers here today. Yeah, I mean, like, I've done a lot of stuff, but I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning. We're trying to figure this all out together. So I appreciate the opportunity to just be in conversation with you today as we talk a little bit about contemplative practices and social emotional learning and leadership, and how we might be able to create the conditions for transformation to actually occur in our lives and in our schools and in our world.
I want to thank you for just acknowledging the name too,
Yeah.
because it was something that so we have this podcast because I wrote a book last year, and somebody
A
approached
great
me.
book, by the way, folks. If you haven't read it,
You haven't read it, plug here.
Megan's framework of intuition and insight and intellect. All three are equally important. So check it out if you haven't read it yet.
Thank you, Mina. Yeah, it came out of that. So I was offered the podcast originally, coming out of that book, and the podcast, the folks that I work with originally wanted me to have it called The Awakened Educator, and I was you said it much more eloquently than I ever could, but my point was that no, we're constantly, if we think we've arrived, that's when we know we're in trouble, because there's so much more we need to learn and explore. And it's a constant, I think as humans, we're constantly opening and evolving. And as educators, I think that's actually the most crucial thing that we can do, is to be in that space of humility and curiosity, and acknowledge that we have more to learn. Often I'm sure you've stumbled across many, as I have as well, people who think they have it all sorted out, and it's actually very problematic. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm so grateful that you're here and you caught that.
Yeah, we're totally, I think we're gonna have lots of moments where we just are gonna flow during the next hour or so that we're in conversation. Well, I'd love to, Megan, just talk a little bit about the work I'm doing now, because, our time overlapped in Oakland, and I had this profound opportunity to be part of the social emotional learning team in Oakland. And Oakland was one of 8 school districts that were part of this initiative called the Collaborating Districts Initiative, which really started with a research question. And that question was, we know we can implement social and emotional learning at the school level, but can it be done in a large, complex urban school system? So some of the other districts that were a part of this initiative were Anchorage, Nashville, Chicago, Sac City. And it was just so profound to be part of this community of practice where we were really trying to figure out how can this be done at a systemic level. And there was a lot of learnings. And I'd say one of the greatest learnings I had was the importance of leadership. And the schools where we actually saw, and I'm sure you saw this, with your time working in school districts as well, the schools we were actually able to have some degree of impact were schools where the leader embodied these social and emotional competencies. And I realized that implementation is ultimately ineffective if we didn't focus on leadership. And in the initiative, there wasn't an explicit focus on leadership. So a few years ago, my mentor, Linda Lantieri, who helped found CASEL, and my dear friend, Daniel Reckstoffen, who's written a number of books on mindfulness and education, came together with this idea to start transformative educational leadership, which is essentially a leadership capacity building organization that centers on the integration of equity, social and emotional learning, and mindfulness in service of systems transformation. And we also made a strong commitment to equity in the sense of, our first cohort was 40% leaders of color. We actually said, we're not going to do this unless we have 40% leaders of color. Our next, we have applications open now. So if you're interested, check us out at teleadership.org. We have applications open until March 15th. And we have leaders across sectors. We have superintendents, principals, members of the SEL team that work in central office like myself, CDO leaders, folks like yourself that are now working in a partner role, helping with whole district and whole school implementation of mindfulness and social emotional learning. And so our inaugural cohort, there were a lot of learnings. It was a really powerful experience. But I really believe that we're filling a gap in the field. In particular, there was a report that came out in the fall from RAND that I believe 80% of our school principals are white identified, and close to half of them felt ill-equipped through their admin credential training program or their leadership program to serve diverse populations. And that's problematic given the fact that our student populations are, more than 50% kids of color in a lot of places. So we're really focused on not just building a pipeline of next generation leaders of color, but supporting white leaders to do deep work around their identity, power, and privilege, so we can all support every child in being able to learn. And I know this is something you're deeply passionate about yourself. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, what constitutes transformation, right? What are the causes and conditions? A word that we throw around a lot. But I believe in my life, if I were to reflect on moments of transformation for myself, it's been an inner shift, right? And mm-hmm. Our behavior, our actions have to do with our beliefs. So that inner work and things like mindfulness and contemplative practice are critically important in being able to do that inner work that results in those shifts, so we can show up in the world and take action in a very, very different way. So
I think what you're saying is really profound.
Pause there.
Yes, I was like, oh, I want to say this, and I want to respond to that, and I want to talk about this. I think what you're talking about is really true, and it's something that I've come to see. My other life is working in an organization that brings mindfulness to schools as well, as you know, and we focus more on the teachers, and it's a big missing piece for us as well, which is actually the leaders are really important, and we tend to want to sometimes bypass them or work around them because they're difficult to tie down and they're busy and they have so many different demands on them. But I think number one, leaders, and I count myself among that group of school leaders and district leaders, they desperately need the mindfulness training and the contemplative practices so that they can ground themselves with all of what they're dealing with, but also so that they can understand why it's important and meaningful for their teachers and for their students, because our leaders are the gatekeepers. They hold the keys to time and money. And so if nothing else, we need them to understand is that they can make it available to others, but also they're also the key change leaders in school settings alongside teachers and have the most impact on our kids. And so if they don't know how they're impacting kids, or they feel ill-equipped and don't know how to talk about their own privilege or their own biases, and everyone has them, every single person has biases, but if we can't talk about them, that's a problem. And yeah, we have this big imbalance in our country where we have most of the educators and school leaders are white identified, and more the students are not. In fact, I think we're hitting at that 50% mark, like nationwide. In other places, the concentration is much higher. So we need to bring in, and we need to attend to our teachers of color and our leaders of color, and we need to bring more of them into our settings, bar none. And we have all these white educators that are there that are wanting to do good work and are nonetheless often negatively impacting their students, not intentionally, but just not understanding and not knowing how to engage with their students, and having a lot of shame oftentimes, I think, or a lot of fear about talking about what's going on for them.
Totally. One of the things we did in our program, Megan, is we actually had racial affinity groups. And it was something that a lot of the white folks in our program were like, whoa, why do we need to do this? And I'm like, because you have to recognize what it means to have a white identity, mm-hmm. and to have a safe space with other white educational leaders to talk through what that means, right? Mm-hmm. And so racial identity work is not just something for people of color. It's something that we all need to engage in, because we're all on a journey, right? Absolutely. We're all on it. We're all on that journey of awakening a little bit more every day.
That's right.
I think this is also informed my sort of understanding of how I conceptualize mindfulness and how I practice it too, you know. And I think initially we've seen like this focus on the non-judgmental present moment awareness, but you know, my understanding of the practice has really evolved as I've gone on my own identity development journey as well.
So how would you define mindfulness now? Like if you were to, you said it's been changing.
Yeah, well, would it be okay if I did a little screen share? Is that okay? And then folks who are listening will still be
Absolutely.
able to understand. So, ooh, let me come up here. Hold on a second. For those of you that are listening, you can use this time to take a few mindful breaths.
There you go.
There you go. This is just a little bit about our program, Transformative Education and Leadership.
Well, tell us about that too, and then get to mindfulness. I'd love to hear about TEL as well.
You know, our model is we have these 3 in-person retreats, one in, you know, 2 in July, back-to-back summers, and then 1 mid-year. And that time together is really important to help create this beloved community. And then folks meet as a whole group with a sensational guest faculty. As you could see here, we have folks like Alina Aguilar and Yvette Jackson and Zaretta Hammond, and you know, a very, very diverse group: Sean Powell, Dan Goleman, Peter Senge. So really thought leaders in our threads of mindfulness, SEL, equity, leadership, and systems change. And so they have an opportunity to engage with these thought leaders, and then they come together in a small cohort to do reflection and integration of their learning. And we're really focusing on transformation at the personal, professional, and systemic level. So those are just some of our guest faculty. And here again are our threads of leadership, equity, SEL, and mindfulness, and that focus on the personal, professional, and systemic.
That's amazing.
What I'd like to do is just start off by making a distinction between, you know, meditation and mindfulness. So for those of you that can't tell by my name, or you can't see me, I'm of Indian origin. And I want to say that contemplative practices are in all cultures and traditions, but a lot of what we see in the States today in terms of meditation and mindfulness do have their origin in spiritual wisdom traditions that originated in the Asian continent. And so terms like meditation are like thrown around and used in colloquial terms. But when I'm talking about meditation, I'm talking about that formal seated meditation practice. That's very, very important to, I think of it, at least for myself, to fill my gas tank, to fuel me up, to create that reservoir that I can then, pull from during the day. And then mindfulness is something that can be practiced anytime, anywhere, with anyone, by showing up and being fully engaged in the here and now. And, I have a small child, I have a toddler, and I don't have the time that I used to have to do this luxurious, long sit in the morning. Time just isn't what it once was. But because I've had years of having that formal seated practice, and I still do sit, not as long. It's been really important for me to be able to engage in SMART practices throughout the day. So these short moments of awareness repeated many times. And I think of my practice now as sort of the interplay of the informal and the formal practice. So there is the formal sitting practice and the informal practice of like, hey, my son's smile is a mindfulness bell. And when I see his beautiful smile, I take a breath and I come back home to myself and I touch the miracle that he is. Or I'm really tasting my coffee this morning. and I'm savoring it in a way. But there's an even deeper level to that informal and formal practice that we can attend to. And it has to do with this term interbeing. So this is a picture of my son. For those of you that can't see, he's here inviting the bell at 16 months. And how I would define mindfulness is paying attention to our inner and outer life as it unfolds while being grounded in our body, our breathing, and our senses, so that our mind can settle and we can cultivate a curious, open-hearted presence and awareness of interbeing. So some of you may have heard this term interbeing before. It comes from my root teacher, who I'm going to talk about in a moment. But I want to start off by just sharing a little story to help describe kind of what I mean about interbeing and the how I really feel and think about mindfulness now. So when I was ages 26 to 31, I lived in India, and I was there studying contemplative practices. It's my ancestral homeland. And when I was 28, my adopted city of New Delhi was a site of numerous bomb blasts that were fueled by tensions between Hindus and Muslims. So in the course of 1 month, there were 5 deadly attacks. I was teaching at the American Embassy School at the time. Our school was under lockdown. And I was really desperate for guidance on how to support my students during this tumultuous time. So I learned that there was going to be a talk at the site of Mahatma Gandhi's death on the anniversary of his birth. And this talk was to be given by a visiting peace activist whose name was Thich Nhat Hanh. And some of you may have heard of Thich Nhat Hanh. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that night, it's 12 years ago, changed my life. It was this profound weaving of birth and death. And Thich Nhat Hanh challenged us all to be Mahatma Gandhi's continuation. And he introduced this term interbeing. So interbeing means to interdependently coexist. Interbeing honors the interdependence of every person to all other persons and aspects of our planet. It's this idea that nothing exists independently, and it's really beyond interconnection. The other day, I was doing one of these like mindful life summits, and someone asked me, they're like, so what do you mean interbeing's beyond interconnection? And I'm like, interbeing's a consciousness shift. When we talk about transformation, when you are practicing mindfulness from a space of interbeing, when you're operating from this place of interbeing, it's this consciousness shift that's happening. So when I'm drinking my coffee in the morning, I'm not just tasting it, but I'm aware on some level the infinite causes and conditions that resulted in that coffee being here, from my beautiful loving husband making the coffee to the people that were growing the coffee and where it was grown and what those conditions were. So it's a very different way of living our lives. And a beautiful illustration of interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that if you were a poet, you would see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. And without the cloud, there would be no rain. If there is no rain, there's no trees. And without trees, the paper wouldn't exist. The cloud is essential for the paper to be there. And he goes on to write that if you look deeply enough, you could even see the logger who cut down the trees and the logger's ancestors as well in that sheet of paper. And the normal way in which we would look at a sheet of paper is through a more extractive consciousness. But approaching, this sense of using paper in this way from this interbeing consciousness, we're a lot more aware of the precious resource it is, and a lot more mindful of those causes and conditions that came into play for that paper to be in existence. So interbeing also is the foundation of the nonviolence Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King practiced. Dr. King wrote that in a real sense, all life is interrelated. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So this sense of justice is inherent to interbeing, right? It's a inextricable part of how we understand mindfulness in interbeing. And that also has to do with the sense that we're connected, right? In the social emotional learning world, we talk about, oh, we need to connect. The truth is we're already connected. We just don't recognize it. But if we can shift our sense of self from that individual sense of being to a connected collective sense of being and really attune to the intelligence of interbeing, then we will view our world, our nation, and the work that we're doing in schools with fresh eyes. And this, I think, is the shift that we're trying to make, that we have to make in society, right? We talk a lot about, collectivist cultures and even things like restorative practices, and why do they resonate so much with so many young people, particularly, in places like Oakland, where a lot of students are coming from more collectivist cultures. So that night in Delhi, on the anniversary of Gandhi's birth, at the site of his death, Thich Nhat Hanh also led us through this exercise where he had us look deeply into our hands to see our ancestors and our descendants. And it reminds me, in that moment, I definitely had the sense of touching my ancestors, who were colonized. And also this sense now as a mother of really wanting to create a world where we are attending to this sense of what kind of ancestor are we willing to be. And this is a teacher of mine, Larry Ward, who is a longtime teacher in sort of the Thich Nhat Hanh spiritual tradition. And he has a very moving talk that really, posits this question: what kind of ancestor are we willing to be? And so my invitation is to practice mindfulness in this way from this place. And I think it's very different from the modern mindfulness kind of, approach. There's this summit that's happening in LA, and Kobe Bryant passed away on Sunday, and a lot of people are mourning that, and including myself and my husband. And the next day, an email was sent out by one of the founders, talking about how, Kobe said that meditation was his secret weapon. And then it went on to advertise purchasing tickets for this event. That action, first of all, was just so unmindful and not representative of this interbeing way of approaching mindfulness that we're talking about, right? Where there is this ethical understanding. So I think that, as mindfulness is getting corporatized and it's getting popular, we have to find a way to honor the sacred traditions that these practices are coming from. And these traditions are really coming from within collectivist cultures. So I think it's something that we need to reflect on as the field, this movement evolves. I'm all for self-care, but mindfulness doesn't stop there, right?
Yeah.
It's the entry point. It's the starting point. And I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh: mindfulness must be engaged. Once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what's the use of seeing? And I'm sure you know of these two wonderful books, Mindful of Race by Ruth King. Actually, our organization, Transformative Educational Leadership, is holding a conference this July 10th to 12th at the Omega Institute, and Ruth King is our keynote. So excited about that. And of course, Rhonda McGee's book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. And, I wanted to also mention, I'm on the journey, I'm on the path, South Asian American identity is complex. I'm brown, but I have a certain degree of privilege, and I recognize that, and I recognize the work that I have to do. And so I've been on my own equity journey. And these are two books that I've read. If there's any other South Asian people listening to this, if you haven't read The Karma of Brown Folk by Vijay Prashad or his uncle Swami, but really understanding better, the South Asian American context and the particular role we need to play in social justice movements. And, I just share this to say that, again, like, we're all on the journey. We all have to do the work. People of color don't all have the answer. We all have work to do. Right? We're all on the journey of awakening. And I will stop my screen share right there if I can.
Thank you so much for that. You shared so many different things that feel really important to raise up. I really love your definition of mindfulness and the distinction between meditation and mindfulness. And it gets broken down in these different categories a lot, right? So like applied mindfulness versus like, now I'm losing all my words, but like there's like the practice part and then there's like the living part. And there's so many misunderstandings about how mindfulness fits and what it means and why it's important. So I think your definition is really profound and really helpful, because I share your perspective, which is that the sitting on the cushion meditation part is really important. And in my mind, it's in service of being able to do the interbeing that you describe, right? So the sitting on the mat helps us to reground ourselves and re-energize, and to have some of that. It gives us the tools to have the perspective taking and more groundedness in the moment. And I love the definition you have of interbeing. I do a similar practice that I've always kind of labeled as a gratitude practice around, like, okay, let me think about my cup of tea in the morning and how are all these different people, what animals, plants, humans contributed to my access to this cup of tea. I love, and I'm now going to add the addition of like, and the ancestors of those animals, plants, and people that also contributed to that. And for me, when I do it, it often makes me feel less alone. So there's a little bit of like, oh, okay, I'm not just out here on my own doing things. There's a connection now that I have with other people that I haven't seen. And so that's just a really powerful way of thinking about it. And I love that you brought in Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King. And today of all days, I think it's a really important day for us to remember our interbeing. I feel like many of us have lost it. And today is the impeachment trial.
Yeah. Can I talk a little bit too about hope?
Yes, absolutely. Please. Hope, help.
Yeah, totally. So, I feel like, so hope is not a term that is, if you look at any of the traditional like Buddhist teachings, hope is not something that's talked about, right? It's more from, at least from my understanding, it's referenced in the Bible and in biblical traditions. So, and recently I was at a talk by Tim Wise, who, is one of a very important anti-racist activist and a great, if white folks, if you haven't read Tim Wise's work, really great resource. And he was speaking at a Unitarian church in Berkeley last month. And one of the first things he said was like, I'm done with hope. That was like his first line. He was like, I'm done with hope. And everyone in the audience like, and he's like, we need action. And I get that. But I really love Joanna Macy's writings on active hope, because hope is an energy and a quality. And I think it's really important, because when I think of, especially now as a mother, and I know you have a young son too, the type of energy that I want to transmit to him is not this, hope that's, it's not a dream or a wish. It's rooted in what's possible. And then we get clear on what are the actions we need to take to create that reality. And at the same time, you have to hold hope in this very paradoxical way, right? Of being, doing everything you can, but not being attached to the fruits of your actions. And this is really, really hard, right? It's actually one of the most famous lines in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a spiritual text I grew up with, to not be attached to the fruits of your actions. But another line that's not often quoted is do not be attached to inaction. Because sometimes we can be like, oh my gosh, like the world's effed up, y'all. And you're like, I can't, you feel paralyzed, right? And in despair. But if we think about the future as, possibilities as a spectrum with hope on one side and despair on another, if we are falling into despair, then what kind of energy are we transmitting? What kind of ancestor are we being, right?
Yeah,
So I feel like hope is a practice. I feel like it's critical, but not that, I'm thinking of Jeff Andrade Duncan's hokey hope. It's not that kind of hope, right? What we're talking about is this hope rooted in interbeing, rooted in the collective, rooted in, our sense of agency that I think is so important. So yeah, things are tough, but we've made gains. And Nicholas Kristof had a great article at the end of 2019 that was like, some things are going really well in the world. We've made progress. And he said, yeah, it might seem really inappropriate to be writing about, things that are good or progress we've made. But I think it's important because I spend majority of my time writing about what's not working. And the thing is if those people who made those gains, like the reductions in poverty that we've had, or even the fact that I am here as a woman of Indian origin, like talking to you, like, growing up in a patriarchal like society and structure, like progress has been made. We need to celebrate that. And if hope wasn't there, I doubt I'd be here.
Yeah.
I doubt we'd be in conversation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I had a weird noise come up there. I don't know if you could hear it, Mina. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think I think having that hope is essential. And I love that idea of active hope. And something Pema Chodron said, which I count her as one of my teachers for sure. I went and saw her speak a few years ago, and she made this reference to energy, which I know it's a little bit more common, but back then it was a little bit less so. And she was like, look, our energy matters, just like you can imagine dumping garbage or any of these other things that are more physical and tangible. Our energy matters. And we have a choice, what kind of energy we want to contribute back into the world. We can contribute negative energy through hateful language or speech, or cutting someone off while you're driving, all those different million little ways that we can contribute that negative energy. But she was just really sincere in that it has a profound effect, and we can just as easily, and it's even more important, to focus our energy on what we can do, and being like every day trying to meet the challenges with love and compassion and care, rather than and contributing that to the world. And ever since she said that, it really has had a big effect on me, and it's helped to hold me over these last few years. I will admit that today I'm feeling a little bit of despair, mostly because maybe it's the aloneness that I sometimes feel. So it's great talking to you today too, of like, okay, we need to, this is a moment in time. So it will pass, number one, and being in the despair of what we're seeing versus in the active hope of what's our agency and what can we do to make things better, I think is really helpful. And also not being attached to an outcome. I think what's been most difficult for me, just even watching the media over the last few days, is how much people have been naming like, well, it's over and now we're going to slide into the abyss. And it's like, okay, we should be aware and obviously be taking active hope, but that giving up, kind of like what you're describing, and putting your hands up and saying that's it, or I'm going to pull back and just enlist rest in despair or in self-preservation, I think is the risk that we're really at right now, versus looking for those active moments where we can apply hope. I love this notion of what kind of ancestor are we being? That's a really profound concept of like, right, it's not just for this now moment, but like for generations to come. We have a responsibility to our own families and to our communities in a way that's going to be really, it's going to be impactful. So I love that notion of that. It's you're so deep, Mina.
Well, you brought up Pema, and I don't know if you've read this passage of hers in When Things Fall Apart, which I should find my copy because it's like all tattered and it's like 20 years old and all tattered. but she has a chapter in it called Hopelessness and Death. And there is a lot of truth to it. And she's thinking about hope in the more like something external is going to save us. And, you know, the notions of hope that, you know, a lot of us grew up with, not the sense of the active hope or the collective hope. And death, you know, is the reality, right? We're all going to die. And so the idea behind that chapter of hopelessness and death is sort of like no escapism. Here are the facts, right? You know, and the idea of how when she talks about hopelessness, it's around when you stop trying to make the moment different, you can settle into the reality that is now. And I think that's a very important teaching. There's a lot of truth to what Pema says. And I'd say Thich Nhat Hanh's response is deathlessness and hope, this idea of us continuing on in our descendants and everyone's whose lives we've touched. And, you know, and his sense of hope really being that engaged mindfulness. But I think so often we in social justice spaces, either we like are just so angry and upset and we can fall into the despair, or we're just like, we got to go, we got to move, we got to make change. And I feel like there's a sweet spot that we need to find where contemplative practice is essential. You know, this sense of being a sacred activist that like is so in tune with ourselves that like, you know what, given what's happening today, like we need to, right? Part of mindfulness is like, you know, recognizing what's arising, accepting it, looking deeply at it, and then how can we transform it? I think an area of growth I've had to have in my practice and still working on is like, I want to move really quickly to transformation, but sometimes you need to sit with the acceptance and really understand and look deeply at it before we can try and transform. And there's a process that has to unfold that we all have to go through. And if we don't do that, then we could just be, you know, one of my teachers said, you know, putting whipped cream on shit. So it's like, we have to just, it takes time and we have to mourn and we have to feel the shittiness that we sometimes, sorry for.
No, it's shitty's good. Like, do it.
We have to feel it. And then we can truly move forward. But it's being able to, I think, the practice is about being able to have an expansiveness inside that we can hold the pain and we can hold the beauty. Because when the Buddha attained enlightenment, he didn't just feel the bliss, he also felt the suffering, right? So it's the expansiveness. And I think, you know, those of us that are trying to practice in this engaged way, we want to be able to feel the beauty of interbeing and also the suffering that those who are part of us, who are us, also experience. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh has this beautiful poem where he talks about, you know, he is like the terrorist and also the one who's the victim of terror. And you know, at the same, sort of along the same lines, he also, one of his powerful instructions for us around mindfulness practice is that you're the crying baby and you're also the mother. You're both. Yeah. And so the ultimate embrace of the practice. Are we getting too woo-woo for Awakening Educator?
No, are you kidding me?
This isn't just me and Megan having coffee. It's
right. I know. I just feel like we're having coffee, but it's good. I mean, I was just sitting I think it's not too woo-woo, but I think it's also what I was thinking a couple of moments ago when you were speaking was a little bit of like, this is what we found each other, which was such a gift, but this is what I often felt was missing in school or with my peers and my colleagues. And so I want to get back to that because I think this is the kind of conversation we need to start having as educators. But one thing I wanted to share in what you're talking about, and it was a helpful reminder, and I've been trying to hold it, is like, interbeing also is we're interbeing with people that we don't like, maybe even with people that we hate or that we are repulsed by. And I've been trying to hold that interbeing as well with all these different people that are scaring me and that I think are really doing so much harm, of like, okay, we're also with you. I can't just say that I'm interbeing with Mina and people that I like, and that's what we're doing over here, because that's just as big of a problem as what those folks are up to, right? Like they're doing that. the other thing I've been trying to hold, and I'm not so good at it, and it comes up for me in education a lot as well, but it was tipped off by what you just talked about around the sitting with the feelings, right? Like we have to sit with the pain before just jumping into action, and sit with the powerlessness and that feeling, but also of like, I'm a part of something bigger. If we go back to your inner being thing again, like, okay, this moment in time is part of something bigger that has a story and a path that I'm a part of, that I need to be responsible and active and aware of, and it's so much bigger than me and than this moment even. So I'm a student of history as you are, so I'm like, I'm trying to like, I've been pulling back a lot to different parts of history, and in some ways actually getting comfort, like, okay, we've had bad things before and we've gotten through them and we've made a leap, and there's been deep suffering and we've moved forward. I feel a lot of fear about the suffering that we're in now and what I feel like might come, but also like, okay, and this is part of this bigger tapestry that we're a part of. And so all of what you're saying today is really resonating. And again, about what instance or do I want to be in the midst of this moment in time. So deep.
There's a couple things that, there's this practice sharing resonance. I'm sure it's like a somatic practice where like when someone's sharing, you like tune into like where you feel engaged and where you're vibrating, and like, girl, I'm vibrating. Like, this is like, we are resonating. But, what you were talking about around, the interbeing with everything, and even with those who were like, wow, how can you believe that? Like, that doesn't make sense. But, part of transformation actually is being exposed to alternative points of view. Part of transformation, like real transformation, I believe, involves us growing our hearts as wide as the world and practicing radical love. And radical love is this sense of like, we're not on the same page, but I still see you. I want to know your pain. Someone asked Thich Nhat Hanh, how do you change what you teach, with different contexts? He's like, I just try to understand their suffering. And so I'm sure you're familiar with that great meditation practice. I don't know if it was the late Ram Dass who created it, but the just like me practice, just like me, this person wants to be happy, just like me, this person is suffering. And, I used to do it with like people I was working with who I was like, I can't believe they did that to that kid. And I'd be incensed, but I'm like, just like me, this person wants to be happy. And then what that does is I can then approach them from a space of connection rather than, energy is a real thing, right? It is felt. People can feel it if you're like, oh, I don't like that person, right? So what can we do to just, grow our hearts, and try and recognize our common humanity? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't, engage in compassionate dialogue, but the only times in history where I've seen radical shifts have been through true nonviolence, and folks like Mahatma Gandhi and MLK and Nelson Mandela who have come to the table with a different energy, and with an intent to understand, and not using they have a different conception of power, right? The power that comes from within versus force. Right. So, that whether you want to call it spiritual power, but it's a very different way of operating. And I think now, I love what you said about looking at different times in history. Joanna Macy talks about the Great Turning, and I'm sure folks are familiar with Valerie Kaur's great sermon that what if this darkness isn't the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb, and that we are here to birth something new. And the reality is, after Trump got elected, my husband does a lot of work with the indigenous grandmothers around here, and he was at a new moon ceremony, and a lot of our fellow progressive also white, folks were there like, oh my God, despair. And one of the Indigenous grandmothers was just like, folks, welcome to the res. This has been happening. This ain't something new, and like, we've had, I think it feels like it is for certain folks, but like you said, in history, we've had tough times. People have suffered. I think folks, particularly in the Bay, are like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy, the world's gonna end, but it's like, welcome to the res. This isn't new. So
well, I think it's been a big awakening for me as a white person, right? And I wrote about it in my book, and I've written some blogs and I talk about it a lot of like, right, and we were talking before we got on, or when you started about this idea of woke, right? Which is part of the reason why I feel like awakening is so important, is that, right, I thought I had a handle on, like, I understood, as much as I can as a white woman, I could understand like my own privilege and bias, and I felt like I had a handle on it. And then all of a sudden Trump was elected, and I had that welcome to the res moment with like within myself, with others, and I was like, oh, right, I have suddenly just woken up to what the realities of people that I love and care about and that I've been living with. I just didn't see it. Like, in the Bay Area, we kind of like to pat ourselves on the back, and we're so open-minded. So it's been shocking to see how much bias and hate has been here, but then to see how much of it's in the world. And yeah, people of color, and especially oppressed folks like Native people, who have just been completely, I don't even have the words for the treatment we've done in the United States. Right, they're like, yep, welcome. So I think that's important, because it helps us then to open up and have more awareness and clarity. But yeah, it's been powerful. We haven't talked about school at all, and we're at 5 minutes left, Mina. So I'm just going to name that's what's true. But you said a couple of things that I'm going to stop on that line thinking, because I'm like, oh shoot, 5 minutes. Okay, so I think one of the things that you said helped me and started to answer a question that I wrote down a while back, which was, so we have this connection and we have this understanding and we see the power of this. And now we're working in a system where most people don't have this understanding and experience. And so I love that you were using because I've wondered often actually how you navigated being in some of the schools that you were supporting. So the idea of the just like me meditation, helping you to like do that connection. I did something from a spiritual teacher who's like talk about woo-woo, she like talks to spiritual teacher, and she does something called believing eyes, which I think is just really cool. And so the believing eyes is really being everyone's champion and really being excited for them and genuinely like just captive and just reflecting back their greatness to them, which I did a lot in our central office meetings. So just so you know, like what I was doing, like I'd go off to some of those meetings, I'd be the believing eyes for a lot of my colleagues. And it really shifted how they engaged with me. They didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't like walking around being like, oh, I'm being the believing eyes for, so-and-so today. I just would do it. And they often didn't even notice it, but it did start to change the tenor of our relationships just in how we were interacting. Some of it just in how I felt about them. But I'm just wondering in these last 3 minutes, because now we're at 3 minutes because I rambled. How do you what are your thoughts on how we start to bring this into educational settings?
Well, I just want to reflect back. I loved Believing Eyes. And I think, the most powerful coaching is coaching those. And, I know that you have a background in coaching as well, but the sense of it rests on your belief in that person's fundamental capacity to, they have the wisdom within. And so can we walk through our lives and in the world as educators, holding that for all our students, and operating from that place. And, in terms of school, there's, I'll just real quick, when I was writing my last book, I was like, I'm going to write the Cliff's Notes version for how you transform your practice through SEL. And then I'm writing it and I'm like, whoa, there is no Cliff's Notes version. You have to do the work. And
Mhm.
so we need to create time and space for educators to do inner work.
That's totally right.
That's it. I am really excited because I've put together in the world of where I know everybody has an online course, but I'll put some of this together in a course that I'll be sharing in April, and I'll share more with you and your audience about that. But my hope is that folks can take the time and the space to do this inner work that we're talking about. And then also they need like the practical strategies, right? It's not just, it's like, I think one of the criticisms of growth mindset is like, oh, well, growth mindset without the actual practical strategies and support is not enough. You need both.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just, pause right there and just say, like, Megan, you rock. This show's awesome. We didn't talk explicitly about education a whole lot, but everything is applicable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we're going to transform schools, it's got to start from within. It's got to start from within.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I love that you, it absolutely does start from within. I do think it's one of those things that when we talk about active hope, I think educators like us and combined with others to really reinforce the fact that educators desperately need, deserve, and must have the time for self-reflection and self-care. And this contemplative work I think it could absolutely shift the trajectory of our country and of how we educate our kids. And it's just so fundamentally important. Teachers are burning out every day. Leaders are burning out every day. I'm so grateful that you have the Transformative Educational Leadership or program. I wish I could be a part of it. Now I might apply myself. I think it's just incredible. I know folks that went through it last year and where they were deeply transformed by the work. In fact, our first guest, Kelly, now I'm going to say her name wrong. Kanoki. She's going to kill me. She was our first guest, and she talked about her experience with you as well. So incredibly transformative. So people, if they want to connect with you, I'll put your website on my website and your contact information. The best way to connect with you is to go to the website.
Yeah, go to meenasrinivasan.com. And there's some free resources there, and there'll be more up in the next few months. And just grateful to you all. I hope you all take care of yourself. Do one thing wonderful to take care of your inner life today. That's my invitation to you all.
That's a great invitation. You're wonderful. I can't wait to have coffee with you in real life soon.
Virtual hug. Okay. Take care, my friend.
Thank you, Meena.
Bye.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Class is just.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
I was waiting for you to say bye to everybody, but
I messed up.
That's all right. That's all right. So what are we doing? Are we still ending the shows, Megan, or how are you feeling?
At the end of February, we're going to take a break and figure it out. It's just hard for me to maintain with my full-time job, and I just need to figure it out. Why don't you, if I may
suggest, why don't you just do both shows bi-weekly, like the Awakening one week and then Three Eyes another week, and then we can play them repeat. You know what I mean? Like if you do the Three Eyes, like if you do the Awakening like the first Friday of the month, and then do the Three Eyes the second Friday, then I'll play the first, opposite weeks. You know what I mean?
I'm going to cancel the Three Eyes no matter what, because it's just too much to maintain.
Sure.
I can definitely bring the other suggestion to Susan, but we're also thinking about, we'll get through February and then maybe take a hiatus and figure out what we want to do. We really are loving the show, but it's really grueling for us to pull it off. So we have
to well, we can probably work out something that you want to do maybe once a month or something like that. That's truly, and in fact, if you don't want to do it live, you can set it up as just a podcast and record it anytime, and you still get the video, and we can still post the video as we do.
Yeah, I think we don't need it live for sure. So that's one of the things we're gonna move off of because it's super inconvenient. So we're thinking on those lines.
Yeah, and with the podcast, if we just keep it as a podcast, then you ultimately can record it at any given time that it's available. And if, just let me know when you want to record so that we can record with the video,
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely think about that. Speaking of recording, we wanted to record on Sunday morning. You don't need to be there, but can we use the room, or should I do a different one?
Yeah. What time do you want to do it at?
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Yeah, that's doable. Just go ahead and use the room. I'll go in at 10 o'clock and just give you the permission, and then that way you have it.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, so we'll do it
Yeah.
at 10 on Sunday, and that'd be awesome.
And then just send me the recording.
Well, if you record on the cloud, then we don't need to fuss with it. It'll probably be easier.
Actually, well, Sunday morning I can actually just record it, and then let's see, because Sunday morning I'm going away Sunday morning on a family trip, but I'm not leaving till after 10. And I don't.
I mean, I can do it on my alternate. I can do it on a different Zoom account if it's too hard for you.
If you can do that, then just send me the file. Yeah, that'd be fine too. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do it that way.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Okay.
Cool.
If that's okay with you, that's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No big deal.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Cameron.
All right. Thanks.
Have a good day.
Okay. You too.
Bye.
Bye.